Marcus is a market research professional who specializes in executive search, competitive intelligence, and business development. She's been in this line of work for over 20 years. Impressive. But when it comes to finding top talent, is it worth paying those fees? Why not just use LinkedIn, even if it takes you a little bit longer to eventually find those same great hires? Julie is joining us from New York, and welcome to the Language of Business.
Thanks, Greg. Glad to be here.
With LinkedIn and all of these other online services being so commonplace, why is headhunting still an old-fashioned, reliable way of finding people?
Because you still need to speak to people to find out what their skill sets are, what the cultural fit is to an organization, and what makes them different than somebody else. A computer program can sort out and pick out keywords on a resume, but it doesn't identify if the person is really the right person for the job.
So is it fair to say that somebody's entire life is not an open book and is not on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook?
I would say for most people that is very true. There is that small percentage of people who put everything up on all of those sites. But from a professional standpoint, you should really only be looking at LinkedIn and the professional media services, not something like Facebook. Facebook is for social media, and that's more personal. So if you're interviewing somebody, you really shouldn't look at Facebook. And at the same time, that particular candidate shouldn't have their whole life open for the world to see either. If you went on a trip to South Africa, that's fine to highlight. If you have philanthropic activities that you like to highlight, that's fine. But not that you spend the weekend throwing back beers with your buddies, tailgating at some game. I think that people want to see that someone's professional, even though we know that you have an outside life. But being professional and always being appropriate, I think, is what people look for.
From the applicant's perspective, why would they choose to use someone like you as opposed to another consultant or another firm?
Well, usually the way it works in executive recruiting, the client, usually the company, hires the executive recruiter. And it's the recruiter's responsibility to go out into the marketplace and find candidates that would be appropriate for the job, skill set wise and culture wise, and whatever other specifics that the client may want. So when you're hiring, it's really the company hiring the executive search firm. There are companies that do hire. You can hire as an individual to find your job, but you're usually told not to do that. It's a little suspect.
The focus of this segment is companies using consultants. Outside of time concerns, could a company more effectively do its executive search or competitive intelligence on its own without needing to hire you or pay your fees?
Many companies are making the financial investment to build their own internal executive search functions and their own business intelligence functions. They've made the financial commitment, the human capital commitment, there's buy-in from senior management. There still is and will always be a need for executive search professionals because some companies don't want to do that, or they really want to have a search that is really confidential and they don't want anybody internal to know about it. So it's really a mixed bag. I mean, there are several companies that do internal executive search quite well, and there are companies that are still figuring it out. For executive search firms, the value that they bring is that they're always out in the marketplace. And they have a pulse on what's going on and what the changes are and who's doing what and the successes, the failures that are constantly going on in business. Internally, sometimes what happens is you're so busy on all your internal projects, you don't necessarily have the time or the ear to the ground to hear what's going out on the street. So I think it's important when you have an internal that you find the time to do and gather your information. But as the external, you provide a lot of value in that you know what's going on the street, you know all the people that are out there, and you can bring a different perspective to a search. So I think there are two answers to the question, and it's what a company feels comfortable with.
If you're retained for your executive search functions or your competitive intelligence functions, what is your real value add to the process as a consultant outside of a couple of young people just doing twice as much work as you might be doing by using the internet?
Well, I think the internet, like everything else, they're just tools, and you have to be able to manage all those tools to get the best results. And it's knowing the questions to ask. And if you don't know, it's still trying to find out what is it that you don't know, because we don't know everything. So I think it's really important for people to ask. You can search the internet, but it doesn't mean you're always going to get the right information from a valued source. And a lot of people put a lot of things on the internet. Some of it is valid and some of it is not.
how involved do you get with the process? Do you just do the interviews and then send back the feedback? Or do you manage the interview schedule? Do you give individual feedback on each candidate? Help our viewers to understand how the process might work with you as a consultant.
The search firm will listen to what the client wants, and then they will suss out what the priorities are for the job. Is there any kind of change that's going to happen in management? Is there any kind of succession planning that's needed? And all the particulars, what's the volume they may be responsible for, their head count, what's the organization looks like, what are the next steps they want this individual to do and perform before they go out into the marketplace to look for candidates. So the search firm will help the client suss out all those details. From there, the search firm will then identify potential candidates, either for benchmarking purposes to see, is this person right, this skill set, that skill set, or is there a specific school they like? And from there, the list is built from target companies, target candidates, people are interviewed, and then the list is dwindled down to a top couple, and then they're presented to the client.
Does a company receive a partial refund if a candidate they hired that you sponsored doesn't last more than 6 months or a year?
Most executive search firms, the fees are split into thirds. And there is that time period if someone does not last, it could be 6 months or 9 months, and that search firm has to redo the search. Usually there's no money given back.
Thank you, Julie. Julie Marcus from New York, who's an executive search specialist. Want to put some excitement into that once-in-a-lifetime party you're planning? Think you can do it yourself? Yes, again, it's more than just the props.
Hiring a consultant for your party. Coming up next on The Language of Business.